Nicholas, I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I have been interested in immortality. I'm not unique in this. The human species, if you look at the world, most people believe that they are immortal. I do not believe that I'm immortal. I would hope to be. I really want to understand what it's about. But to really understand it, we need to understand why I feel this way. Why do I feel that I want to be immortal and at times convince myself that I am?
Okay. Well, belief in immortality makes sense in a way because it's actually the most natural assumption out of the very nature of consciousness. Consciousness doesn't seem to be the kind of stuff which could die. After all, it's immaterial. And anyway, it's unimaginable to us that we have been put on Earth to have this special, unique, individual existence and that it could all come to an end in less than 100 years. I mean, what an absurd idea. The critic George Steiner has said that death is a scandal. And yes, it does seem to us a scandal. So I think it makes sense that we would have some belief in immortality, but that's almost certainly been reinforced by the necessity which nature has discovered of a belief in immortality, because humans who didn't believe in it may well have become so depressed that they found that their lives were actually not sustainable. They gave up on the projects which were essential to their biological success. So I actually think that belief in the immortal soul is a human adaptation, and that consciousness has been rejigged to some extent in order to reinforce it. Well, I could say, of course, that belief in immortality is comforting. It makes us actually not fear death in the way which we would do otherwise, but it's more than comforting. I think that actually, in the course of the history of our species, it may even have been a necessary belief, because the prospect of death, for those, once it occurred to human beings, that that would be the end, annihilation, oblivion, may have proved to be, may have been, because the prospect of death may have turned out to be so deeply depressing that actually it undermined all human projects. Mm-hmm. I think there was possibly a turning point in the history of our species when we, already spiritual beings, believing in the importance of the individual and so on, became so clever and so sophisticated that we really did begin to speculate about the world and its meaning beyond our own individual life. And at that point, it dawned on us that we're not going to be there. Now, insofar as everything we were engaging with in life, from having children to building monuments to building societies, was premised on these things lasting into the future, the idea that that future for us, we who matter so much to ourselves, were not going to be present there, was a really, really frightening prospect. And I'm not alone in thinking that actually it could have spelled the end of the human species. It may, in fact, I mean, there have been times in human evolution where there have apparently been crashes in the population where it's possible that the real interpretation of these was that human beings lost heart. Now, our ancestors didn't lose heart. We're here. Clearly, something enabled us to survive this potentially catastrophic realization of the end, that our lives were coming to an end.
And what's this relationship between this sense of death, which leads to a desire for immortality? We can't have the latter without fearing the former, in relationship to this sense of consciousness that we have?
Well, what do we want to survive? We want our consciousness to survive. That's the point of life after death as we imagine it. Talk to anyone who believes in the immortality of the soul, and that soul is them. It's going to be them with some aspects of their personality and memories and everything else. So it's our individual consciousness, which we like to imagine going on beyond the death of our bodies. How could we possibly come to believe in that? Well, I think, fortunately for us, and this may just have been a bit of luck, consciousness as it had been designed and created by the earlier stages of human evolution had the very qualities which were necessary, or certainly helped us to develop this newer idea, certainly the idea of immateriality. We already believed that our souls actually could exist independently of physical matter. Well, that was a precondition, of course, of them surviving bodily death. But then there were other aspects of consciousness which seemed tailor-made to fit into this developed idea of the immortal soul, particularly as it's been developed in the Abrahamic religious traditions, where it's the individual who survives as the individual who he or she was. It's that individual who will come to the day of judgment and so on in the next life. So individuality, which was what consciousness originally created for us, has been the very basis of the belief in the afterlife.
And how does that give selection, survival benefit to the species?
So, well, and how the sense of immortality helps us survive is by basically allowing us to escape from the totally debilitating consequences of believing in the pointlessness of our lives, the pointlessness of our projects. It doesn't save everybody from it. Suicide is not a rare thing in human species, and it's a lot of people clearly do lose the sense that their lives have meaning, and the idea that death is going to be the end is one of the strongest reasons, perhaps, why we doubt the value of the life we're living here on Earth. But the one thing we know is that none of our ancestors committed suicide, at least not before they were childbearing age and before they'd brought us up to the age at which we could care for ourselves. We know that of the tens of millions of ancestors whom we've had in the last 100,000 years, not one of them killed themselves. So something prevented them from despair. And my guess is it's a scientific hypothesis of a kind that it was belief in the immortal soul.